human word, and it had a little bit of baggage, and therefore I referred to that infinitely loving being as Om. That was the sound that I heard in that realm. And of course, it was only years after that that I started hearing that to other people, Om means something very similar. But I knew nothing of that at that time, and to me, the word Om had no baggage, and that's why I attached it to that being. But of course, as I started writing all my experience up and trying to explain it, I realized that to discuss it with other humans, I was referring to what some might call God, others might call Allah, others would call Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh. I don't care what the words are. The words get in the way. They make it look like it's an intellectual discussion, you know, some high school or college debate. It's not. That world is absolutely real. And that is something that is coming to this world in no uncertain terms as this world awakens even now, which I think is happening for a very big reason. Now, it turns out the reason that I was so shocked by all this, as I said, the neocortex. Modern neuroscience would tell you that the rich details of any kind of conscious awareness and experience depends on at least part of that neocortex, the outer surface of the brain, the human part of the brain, being intact. And that's why severe bacterial meningitis was such a perfect model for human death. And in fact, those who have read the book will realize I put together 9 hypotheses. There were actually others that I entertained with colleagues in trying to explain this experience as a brain-based mechanism. I was completely blown away by the power of that ultra-reality, as are so many others who have near-death experiences. And it's something that, of course, we cannot really put into words. And that's part of the trouble of coming back and talking about a realm with butterflies and beautiful flowers and a beautiful girl and souls dancing in angelic choirs, is people are tempted to think, well, yeah, that's a trick of the dying brain. Well, guess what? I think a better way to look at it is it's much more like Plato's world of forms. It's an ideal world that's much more real than this one. It's the world on which this material universe is based. And it's a realm with which all of our souls are very familiar because we've all been there and we all go back there. And that is a crucial part of this understanding. Now, it turns out that initially when I came back, my doctors would tell me, well, you can forget about it. You know, your brain was way too sick, your neocortex was far too damaged, that was all some trick of the dying brain, it didn't really happen. But I knew something had happened. As I said, all of my knowing of brain-mind consciousness had been deleted. That only returned over about 8 weeks afterwards. And in the meantime, my doctors had kind of given me this clue. It had to be a brain-based trick. And so, in fact, that's how I treated it, even though I found it to be astonishing. As I told my older son, Eben IV, who came home the day before Thanksgiving 5 years ago, and that was 2 days after I got out of the hospital, he could tell there had been a tremendous change. He had seen me in the hospital for 4 days and nights. He had gotten there that first night right before Phyllis arrived and saw that corpse being ventilated 12 times a minute by the machine. He knew I was already gone. And so he was especially shocked. Of course, he had heard that I was coming back to this world, and he came home from school that day before Thanksgiving, and he was amazed. He looked at me. I was 13 pounds lighter, had an IV in, getting home antibiotics, but he could tell there had been a tremendous transformation. I was much more present than I'd ever been. And he could tell the passion I had to try and record all this and understand it. And of course, I wanted to read everything I could about near-death experiences, and he gave me the best advice I've ever received. He said, don't read anything about near-death experiences, physics or cosmology, until you've written down everything. So I spent the next 6 weeks or so writing 20,000 words of everything I could remember from deep in coma. The whole story was there in those first days when I came back. Every bit of it was there. And in fact, the evidence was there that it happened between days 1 and 5 of a 7-day coma. And that was a tremendous part of understanding. I think to try and pull this together, I do want to point out that what I went through after that time was trying to come to a deeper understanding of consciousness. Important to define here, consciousness is not the voice in our head. I would have thought that before my coma, you know, the little voice that we hear in our head. That's actually your linguistic brain. It's tightly tied up with ego and with self, and in fact there is far deeper wisdom within our consciousness. And the little voice in the head is not even the decision maker, oddly enough. I talk about that briefly in my book, referring to the experiments of Benjamin Libet, where you can actually record electrically over the surface of the scalp, record brain activity, and demonstrate that that little voice in the head is informed of the decision, but it's not the decision maker, because the decision is made earlier than that little voice is aware of it. An important implication of all this, for some people, they often ask, well, are animals conscious? Well, actually, animals can be extremely conscious. I would say even more so than humans sometimes, because the little voice in our head actually gets in the way of deeper consciousness. That's why I do so much work now with meditation, centering prayer, the work with sacred acoustics, as I've said, in developing sound files that help people get into deep transcendental conscious states, which I am convinced are freeing us up into non-local consciousness. The true consciousness, a better way to look at it, is the observer. It's the observer that sees that voice. And that is the real mystery. I would say the voice in our head is little more than a fancy parlor trick. As a neurosurgeon, I knew the parts of the brain devoted to that are very small and minimal. In fact, the observer aspect is the far richer part of this, and that's something that I get much more in tune with in the meditations. Now, it's important to point out that it's not like this is a simple issue, the mind-body debate, trying to look at what is mental versus what is physical phenomena, the mind and the brain. That discussion's been going on for more than 2,600 years. You'd think we'd be getting close to some kind of an answer. Well, I think we are getting closer to an understanding, but I also realize from my journey that human brain and mind will never understand everything. And in fact, the hard problem of consciousness, which basically says that no neuroscientist on earth can give you the first sentence to explain how the physical brain might give rise to consciousness, is arguably the most vexing conundrum known to all of human thought, the hard problem. And that is something that I was really not very aware of before my coma. So I think it is important to point out we are conscious in spite of our brain. The brain is there more as a reducing valve or filter. In fact, I recently finished Wilder Penfield's wonderful book, The Mystery of the Mind, which was published in 1975. Penfield was probably one of the most renowned neurosurgeons of the 20th century. And he probably still holds the record with having stimulated the brain, electrical stimulation of the brain in awake patients more than any other neurosurgeon. He did it tens of thousands of times. And one thing that he was absolutely convinced of, the mind is not in the brain. Never once in all of those stimulations was there a free will type of event. Every single one, no matter what the effect of that electrical stimulation, the patient felt like a puppet on a string. They knew. And the point that Penfield took from this is it was very clear, as it's clear to me, the mind is not created by the brain. And the implication is tremendous. The implication is that when our awareness is freed up from the physical brain and body, say at the time of bodily death, it actually comes to a much higher level of awareness, reuniting with the souls of departed loved ones and with the divine, going through that life review. It's a tremendous shift in my understanding of brain, mind, consciousness, and the very nature of all of existence. And as I said, not only the hard problem, but the hard problem of consciousness, but the enigma of quantum mechanics is a very, very deep mystery that demands that pure materialism basically says that pure materialism in science is far too simplistic and cannot possibly explain it. Soul, spirit, consciousness, absolutely real at the core of all that exists. And that is a tremendous shift in my thinking, and for a lot of others. But I tell you, a lot of the scientific community, medical schools, nursing schools, asking me to come speak, this is an awakening that the scientific community is very much open to. People often ask, well, what do your scientific colleagues, your critics, think of this? Well, I had a lot of help from very open-minded skeptics, open-minded critics in trying to get deeply into this mystery and understand the revelations of my journey. And that's to be distinguished from the few voices out there that are so hooked into scientific materialism that they can't possibly let go of their thinking, and they insist that my adventure must have been some hallucination or dream. Well, important to point out that for weeks after my coma, I was my own worst critic. I was the one thinking it had to have an explanation in the brain. I was the one going to my colleagues and to my doctors and others, going through those medical records and trying to explain it as occurring in my brain. And it was really through their insistence that I started realizing it was too real to be real, as I had told Evan IV, the day before Thanksgiving, because it really happened. But it really happened in a realm that's far more real than this one, at the eternal home of our spiritual souls. And I think very much that my message is one that transcends some of the confusion that can come from that either-or thinking. It says you're either spiritual or you're scientific. And also that says that there are fundamental differences between the religions and that one religion might be better than the others. Well, in fact, that kind of thinking is very misleading and confusing. It's dogmatic, basically dysfunctional human thinking, trying to kind of limit things out and compartmentalize it, and that's where so much of the confusion comes in. So it's very much by ascending above and beyond those false definitions and boundaries that we can get much closer to truth. And in fact, I came to realize that pure materialist science is a dead end. It will succumb to those deep mysteries at the impasse of the hard problem of consciousness and the enigma of quantum mechanics. Some of you may be familiar with the idea of the God of the gaps. That's a general idea in kind of the skeptical and scientific community, that God fills in the gaps for what we don't know. Of course, in this era of publish or perish, or as I used to say at Harvard, publish and perish, it turns out that God of the gaps is an idea where publish and perish, and then finally somebody has a theory of everything, and of course they're clamoring to get to the front of the line to give you the theory of everything. One thing my journey showed me very clearly: human brain and mind will never have a theory of everything. Don't be a fool. Don't go that route and embarrass yourself. And what I would put out there is, what do you think God of the gaps looks like if there is truly an infinitely powerful God at the core of all existence? I would tell you that looks a whole lot like the hard problem of consciousness, the deepest mystery known to all of modern human thinking. And that should be a clue to us as to what's really going on here. Now, to know these truths, you don't have to die. That's why I'm a big fan of deep meditation, centering prayer, and once again, remind you the work of Sacred Acoustics. Those who are interested in those kind of sound meditations, I work very closely with them to develop these, and you can go to sacredacoustics.com to learn more about all that and about brain entrainment through sounds. It turns out that, as I often say, we're conscious in spite of our brain, and the brain actually, I believe, serves as a veil. And I would say, in fact, that neocortex is a big part of the veil. To me, the very clear proof of that in my experience had to do with that transition in the Earthworm Eye View, seeing that beautiful melody, that white spinning light that came towards me and opened up into an ultra-real, rich, vibrant, verdant valley far beyond earthly description. And I was deeply mystified by that transition from what I saw as the best consciousness my brain could muster, soaking in pus, this very primitive, unresponsive realm, up into the brilliance of that valley. And I would say that, in fact, that's what led me into the audio manipulations of brain entrainment, was thinking if I could occupy my neocortex electrically using sound, as is portrayed in the work of Sacred Acoustics, that maybe I could duplicate that. And that's why deep meditation, centering prayer, for me, is a very clear avenue to get right back into those realms, into much deeper knowing of those guides, of that eternal, infinite, spiritual God at the core of it all. For those out there in neuroscience who say, wait a minute, you're saying that some kind of damage to the neocortex can lead to enhanced function? Well, I would point out terminal lucidity. I give an example of that in my book, and this is something often seen when a demented elderly patient is in the process of leaving their physical body once and for all. They have moments of lucidity where their thinking is clearer than it's been in years. And they often have that at times when they're seeing the souls of departed loved ones there to see them. That's an example of thinning of the veil of the brain and allowing us to see the true richness of our existence. The other example I'd give out there for the clinical neuroscientists having their doubts are the phenomena of acquired savant syndromes. And of course, after brain injury and in autism, things like that, people can have very advanced, superhuman abilities of memory, of calculation.